legislative candidates registered to be on January's ballot ahead of the deadline this Friday. A breakthrough deal is reached between Israel and Hamas for the release of some Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Stark warnings from climate scientists after the average global temperature reached 2 degrees for a record 2 days in a row. Plus, we dive into the film Eye of the Storm, one of this year's Golden Horse frontrunners, inspired by the 2003 SARS outbreak. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. Legislative candidates in Taiwan are registering to be on January's ballot. The Democratic Progressive Party's presidential candidate Lai Ching-te and Kuomintang chairman Eric Chu are showing support for their party's legislative candidates as they register in Taichung, where 8 legislative seats are up for grabs. Friday is the deadline to register. Voters will decide 113 legislative seats. The ruling DPP currently holds 63 seats in the legislature compared to the opposition KMP's 38. While Taiwan's ruling DPP is considered the favorite to win the presidency in January, the race for the legislature is much closer, meaning that the executive and legislative might end up being controlled by different parties. To find out more about what a divided government could mean for Taiwan, our reporter Rick Glauert spoke to Stanford University political scientist and research fellow Karis Templeton.
Could you tell us a little bit about how Taiwan's political system works? How is power divided between the legislature and the executive branch?
So Taiwan is a unitary government with a directly elected president who appoints the premier, who then appoints the entire cabinet. And the president can appoint or remove the premier at will. The president doesn't need the legislature to confirm the premier. And so, in effect, it operates much like a full presidential system. The legislature now is elected at the same time as the president, so they're concurrent, which in practice means that the presidential race tends to overshadow the legislative race, and there's pretty high correlation, at least among the districts, between a party's presidential vote share and their legislative candidates' vote share.
And what do you think are the chances for a divided government in Taiwan?
So Taiwanese voters in this election, when they go into the ballot booth, will receive 3 different ballots. One is for the president, the second is for their legislative district representative, and the third is a party list vote. And so they can vote freely for different parties on each of those ballots. In the past, typically a voter who casts a vote for the DPP, for president, also votes for the DPP in the district, and generally has also voted for the DPP on the party list. And so there's been pretty consistent party line voting. That broke down a little bit in 2020, and it's likely to break down again in 2024. So I think because of that, even if we have a DPP candidate who wins the presidency, the DPP is actually much less assured of a majority this time around than they were in 2016 or even in 2020.
And so what would a divided government mean for Taiwan?
There's a precedent for this from 2000 to 2008 when Chen was the president and the opposition held the majority in the legislature. That was generally not a fun time. There was deep partisan polarization. The opposition, almost from day one, kind of decided to go to war with the Chen Shui-bian administration and try to undermine his presidency. And so by the end of his 2 terms in office, the legislature and the executive branch were just in a constant state of political warfare. So at the extreme, that's potentially what divided government in Taiwan looks like. I'm a little more optimistic that under the current situation, if the DPP were to maintain control of the presidency but lose the legislature, it would not look quite as dire as the Chen Shui-bian era.
That was Stanford University political scientist and research fellow Karis Templeton speaking to reporter Rick Glauert. A recent survey has found that Taiwanese people are feeling more skeptical of China and the U.S. The survey conducted in September by Taiwan's top research institute, Academia Sinica, asked over 1,200 Taiwanese adults questions about relations between China, Taiwan, and the U.S. Just over 9% of respondents thought that China was a trustworthy country, with around 34% saying they trusted the U.S., a more than 10% drop compared to 2021 figures. Still, almost 56% said the U.S. had increased support for Taiwan in recent years, but around 83% believed that the threat from China had also increased. The results of the survey come just after the APEC leaders meeting in San Francisco, where U.S.-China relations showed signs of improvement. The EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service for the first time recorded temperatures surpassing a 2-degree increase compared to pre-industrial levels. The record was shattered 2 days in a row. It's not a breach of the long-term 1.5-degree threshold decided at a Paris summit in 2015, but scientists warned that the climate crisis is already taking its toll. Sally Jensen has more.
Rescue teams help wounded animals in the world's largest tropical wetland. Rains have finally put out fires that ripped through Brazil's Pantanal last week.
Vítima do fogo, tá com as patas todas demasiadas, né, queimadas. A gente consegue ver a pata do posterior aqui, traseiro já bem.
A lethal heat wave had swept across the country, sparking the fires that harmed these creatures. Heat index records were broken in Rio de Janeiro, and a fan died at pop star Taylor Swift's concert amid 39 degrees Celsius temperatures there.
Sim, nesse período está calor bem complicado. A gente já está acostumado com a temperatura mais elevada, mas nessa onda de calor está pouco mais acima do que a gente está acostumado.
All this just days before an earth-shattering finding. The planet breached 2 degrees of heating above average for 2 days straight, for the first time in recorded history. This is not a breach of the Paris Agreement to hold long-term temperature rise to well below 2 degrees, but a UN report published this week says the world is on track to warm by nearly 3 degrees this century. That would have devastating consequences for humanity.
We will see maybe 10 times as many extreme weather events in terms of extreme temperatures. We will see more heavy precipitation. And of course, there are lots of damages following, such as wildfires and so forth.
Governments around the world are planning to address the issue at COP28, the UN's annual climate summit taking place at the beginning of December. EU lawmakers are urging countries to take aim at fossil fuels, the main cause of the climate crisis.
So those who have the ability to pay should pay. That those who pollute a lot themselves should take that responsibility.
But for some, time is already running out. Those who bear the least responsibility are subjected to the worst consequences as temperatures continue to rise. Andy Scher and Sally Jensen for TaiwanPlus.
Protests around the world are calling on Chinese companies and state-owned enterprises to not invest in a fossil fuel mega project in Uganda and Tanzania. The proposed East Africa crude oil pipeline would run almost 500 kilometers, passing Lake Victoria. It's set to cost up to $5 billion and displace almost 200,000 people in the region. Reporter Sally Jensen spoke to Zaki Mamdou, the coordinator of the Stop EACOP campaign in South Africa.
We've just seen protests around the world as part of this global movement against EACOP, the East Africa crude oil pipeline. But the pipeline has been a long time in the making, decades. Can you tell us why these protests are just happening now? What's the latest development?
And those actions were taking the message, very clear message, to those various Chinese entities and state-owned corporations, to say that they should not get involved. We do not want them to come in and be the last resort for dirty energy and environmental and socioeconomic harm in Africa.
So do you think that this is happening more now that Chinese entities and companies are kind of investing in fossil fuels in Africa? Are they sort of replacing perhaps Western companies? Is this what we're seeing?
Look, I wouldn't say that they are replacing Western companies, because Western companies are still incredibly active across the continent in numerous incredibly harmful and destructive projects, and as they have been, since the colonial era through until now. But we definitely are seeing, various Chinese institutions and state actors coming into Africa and playing a similar role to that which the West has played over hundreds of years, and coming in and trying to extract as much as possible as they continue, to compete with existing superpowers on the global stage.
Have there been instances of, human rights abuses when it comes to the infrastructure projects that they're building out?
Absolutely. In the case of ECOP, the entire project, since the time of its kind of implementation and through the land acquisition process, has been surrounded in all manner of human rights violations and abuses, including the forced relocation and dispossession of tens of thousands of families.
But so many countries around the world are addicted to fossil fuels, and many have made climate targets and commitments. But what do you think is really the best way to stop ECOP and to make sure that fossil fuels are ramped down as quickly as possible?
Look, what we need is a strong and viable, realistic alternative to projects like ECOP. And in order to create that, in order to make sure that the type of development that we pursue is one which genuinely meets the needs, including the energy needs of people on the African continent, these alternatives must be rooted in the experiences, the aspirations, and the agency of communities who stand on the front lines.
That was Sally Jensen talking to Zaki Mamdou, the coordinator for the Stop ECOP campaign in South Africa. To watch the full interview, visit the TaiwanPlus website. The total lockdown of a Taipei hospital during the 2003 SARS outbreak is the subject of one of the front-runners of this year's Golden Horse Awards. Our reporter Reese Ayers dives into the film Eye of the Storm.
来，50名在 IV push。
好 push， 今天先停下。
17 years before the COVID-19 pandemic, an outbreak of another coronavirus shook Asia. Severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS for short, killed over 20% of people who caught the disease in Taiwan, leaving a painful mark on society here. One that director Lin Chun-young explores in his Golden Horse Award-nominated movie, Eye of the Storm.
这个事件在台北市其实当年是一个非常重大的公卫事件。那因为那个事件，所以以至于我们现在在COVID 这段时间，比如我们的医疗资源、我们的负压隔离病房，我们的整个公卫的体系，就是准备好了，可以应对这样子当下的一场战争。
Lin's film is a dramatization of the sudden lockdown of Heping Hospital in Taipei in April 2003, when the city government isolated over 1,000 medical staff and patients for up to 2 weeks. 31 people died inside the hospital. Lin said he wanted to accurately depict the difficult and graphic conditions healthcare professionals work in.
在创作过程当中，技术上必须一直在克服的部分，包含了我们要还原一整座医院，包含了里面所有的医护人员，医生必须要有医生的行为、外在跟技术。
Eye of the Storm follows a fictional surgeon, played by Wang Baojie, and his colleagues as they struggle to manage panicked patients confined within the hospital. All this while dealing with the virus and trying to keep it from spreading. Lin wanted his film to depict the warlike nature of such incidents. He says it's a metaphor for the battles people face across the world every day.
这个故事本身就是讲人类面对一场像是战役的一个灾难事件，然后在这个灾难底下所应对出的每一个角色各自的一些选择跟人性。
Lin's film is also a study of human nature, particularly on how people act during crises, while not patronising the audience by trying to teach them what's right or wrong.
好，你自个儿带，来，来，自个儿带，好。
那透过电影这样子的一个媒材，我们有机会跟着这些角色去做出一些决定。这些决定也许跟你原本的设定是一样的，也许在你跟着角色的过程当下，你发现你会想要去选择一些更英雄的行为，也说不定。
Eye of the Storm is available to watch on Netflix. It's nominated for 8 awards at the 60th Golden Horse Awards, including the most coveted award, Best Narrative Feature. The award ceremony is set to take place on November 25th. Luffy Lee and Reese Ayres for TaiwanPlus.
For more on the Golden Horse Awards and this year's nominees, search Golden Horse on the TaiwanPlus website. Coming up, the story of the Lost Army, scattered remnants of the anti-communist forces who returned home 30 years after the end of the Civil War.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee, we make the news. Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Israel has approved a Qatar-negotiated deal with Hamas for the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Rosie Greninger has the story.
After hours of talks within Israel's war cabinet, a breakthrough. A deal brokered by Qatari mediators will see 50 of the more than 200 Israeli hostages taken by Hamas militants on October 7 released after 6 weeks of fighting. That group, made up of women and children, is set to be freed over 4 days. It'll coincide with a pause in the fighting in Gaza, and Israel says that for every additional 10 captives released, another day of ceasefire will follow. Hamas, the militant group that controls Gaza, says the exchange means freedom for 150 Palestinian prisoners, also women and children, being held in Israel. But before that meeting, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the war to eliminate Hamas will continue.
כאילו אחרי ההפוגה להשבת חטופינו, אנחנו נפסיק את המלחמה. אז אני מבקש להבהיר, אנחנו במלחמה, ונמשיך במלחמה. נמשיך במלחמה עד שנשיג את כל היעדים שלנו.
Despite that, the deal is a chance for much-needed reprieve in Gaza. The pact will allow the entry of hundreds of aid deliveries for the population facing a humanitarian crisis, having weathered intense bombardment and a blockade from Israel. Analysts say it won't fix the crisis there, but it will help.
It's absolutely not enough. The Gaza Strip is home to more than 2.3 million Palestinians. These have been cut off from all sorts of necessary items, from fuel to water to obviously electricity, humanitarian equipment and material, as well as food items. So it's not enough. However, it is better than the current situation, and it will provide a much needed relief.
The death toll in the embattled enclave has surpassed 14,000 people, according to its health ministry, and more than 1.5 million people are displaced. Medical assistance will be given to those in need, including to the other Israeli hostages being held. But relatives of those not included in this first stage are calling for the release of everyone.
It's difficult to know that he's not the first in line, but we do understand it. But we are not going to give up, and we are going to stand here and talk to everyone and do all we can do until he comes back home.
The people of Israel have 24 hours to appeal against the deal in the Supreme Court before the timing of the swap is announced. And for the people of Gaza, a day until a potential respite in the fighting. Chris Ma and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
North Korea says it successfully put its first spy satellite into orbit. It's Pyongyang's third launch attempt this year. It comes after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited Russia in September to gain support for satellite development projects. The UN bans North Korea from conducting satellite launches, calling them covers for missile tests. The launch led to condemnation from the United States and South Korea.
이는 탄도미사일 기술을 활용한 북한의 어떠한 발사도 금지하고 있는 UN 안보리 결의에 대한 중대한 위반이자 우리의 안보를 위협하는 직접적인 도발입니다.
Tech star Sam Altman is back at OpenAI as the company reverses its decision last week to fire him as CEO for unstated reasons. The move comes after most of the company's staff threatened to quit and follow Altman to Microsoft. OpenAI has become a household name since the launch of its chatbot, ChatGPT. The company says it's still working out the details of Altman's return. The founder of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, Binance, has stepped down as chief after pleading guilty to money laundering charges in the U.S. Changbong Zhao, better known as CZ, has been accused of knowingly providing a platform for, quote, bad actors to process illegal payments. Zhao will personally pay a $50 million fine and could face several years in prison. Despite the investigation, Binance remains by far the largest crypto exchange platform in the world, with an over 40% market share of all cryptocurrency trades. Throughout 1970s and 1980s, thousands of former Chinese soldiers were resettled in northern Taiwan, some of the last remnants of what is known as the Lost Army. Their history and community now have their own museum. Ed Moon has more.
A sea of red and blue. Hundreds of Republic of China flags fly in the heart of northern Taiwan's Taoyuan. This is Zhongzhen New Village, and behind flags and quiet exterior lies a story of 20th century war, heartbreak, and renewal. Because the people who built this community were not from Taiwan, but were former members of the Republic of China's Lost Army. At the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, Chinese nationalist forces led by Chiang Kai-shek escaped not only to Taiwan, but also into Myanmar and other parts of Southeast Asia through the southern Chinese border. There they formed an anti-communist base in the hopes of one day returning home. For decades, these soldiers remained in the so-called Golden Triangle, the area where the borders of China, Laos, Myanmar and Thailand meet. But they weren't welcome guests in their new countries, and the ROC government on Taiwan was eventually forced to evacuate them. Thousands of soldiers were resettled in Taiwan in the 1970s and 80s. Among them was Wang Genshen. Wang was born into an ethnic Chinese family in northern Myanmar. He joined the military intelligence bureau embedded in the Lost Army when he was just 15.
当时我们是华侨学校，我们老师就是当年眼睁睁留在缅甸的这些军人，中华民国，于是乎在灌输我们是中华民国是你的宗主国。
Wang was determined to tell the Lost Army story to others in Taiwan. In 2022, he opened the Lost Army Story House right in the heart of the Taoyuan community where so many of its former soldiers had settled.
这个奔走跟这个10几年的时间里面，遇到很大的挫折，因为政府它没有经费来做这件事情。那后来呢，只有我自己做，所以我故事馆花10几年时间收集资料，单单收集资料就花了很多的精力跟物力。
Among the stories told in the museum is Wang's own. He fought as an anti-communist guerrilla in Southeast Asia. He even helped American forces.
那我们是那个时候我们就变成一个小组，就帮这个美军呢找他的基地。那基地怎么找呢？就是比如他老美他面孔跟东方人不一样，他没法深入到他的那个底后去，只有我们去帮忙找，拍那个携带小的摄影机啊、小的这个照相机啦、器材啊，然后去找到苗共的基地以后呢，开始做坐标，坐标后回报以后呢。 他们就向那边射击，沿着炮弹攻击。
Wang then became a secret agent. One of his jobs was to recruit and deploy spies into China.
我们每一个情报员呢，你手下会有县民的，还有一些是专门作为暗杀的做一些。那我当目标确定了，任务确定以后，我就找我下面的手下人去执行这个东西。
While the Lost Army is a topic close to Wang's heart, not all in Taiwan are happy to see it celebrated. For some, the Army's members in its history are Chinese and should not be associated with Taiwan.
很多台湾人会认为说，这些人根本心不在台湾，就是不会想要留下来为台湾这块土地打拼的话，很多人是持反对态度，而且这些人他们忠于的是蒋介石集团的那一个政权。当然，对很多台湾人来讲的话，也有些台湾人是没办法接受这样的一个观念。
Officially, though, Taiwan's government has continued to support the soldiers. It has helped lost army veterans and their family members settle in Taiwan, giving them somewhere to build a new life and a chance to remember the trauma of the past.
我们最主要是希望这些军人呢灵魂得以安息，那没有死的人呢，还在存活的这些军人呢得到一个安慰，最起码还有人记得他们，国家记得他们，这样的感觉来做这个故事馆。
Eason Chen, Sam Hui, and Ed Moon for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories on Taiwan and around the world. Finally, today we leave you with images of the Castellar de Villafranca group forming human towers in Mexico City. I'm Betty Chen. Take care and see you next time.